Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over.
I met Haley at a local art workshop about a year ago. She was this vibrant, creative woman who seemed to light up the room with her energy. We were paired together for a project, and the connection was immediate. She was talented, funny, and seemed to have her life completely figured out. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs I missed, all the red flags that were waving right in front of me. The first few months were perfect, almost too perfect. We went on amazing dates, shared similar interests in art and music, and everything felt natural. But then slowly, things started to change. It wasn't obvious at first, just little things that seemed odd, but not exactly alarming. She began asking where I was constantly. If I didn't respond to a text within 30 minutes, I'd get 3 or 4 more in rapid succession. At first, I thought it was sweet. She was just thinking about me, right? But then the messages became more frequent, more demanding. She wanted to know who I was with, what I was doing, why I hadn't responded immediately. Then she started showing up unexpectedly, not just at my apartment, which was concerning enough, but at my friends' houses too. If I was having drinks with Marcus and Jessica at their place, she'd suddenly appear, claiming she was just in the neighborhood. She'd show up at my regular coffee shop, at the gym, at the art supply store I frequented, always with some excuse about why she happened to be there. The real turning point came when I went on a business trip to Boston. I received a text from her saying, "Your apartment looks different in the evening light." She had somehow gotten into my apartment while I was away. When I confronted her about it, she acted like it was perfectly normal, saying she was just checking on things. Peter, my building's concierge, later told me she'd convinced him she was bringing me some important work documents I'd forgotten. She'd played the role of the concerned girlfriend so well that he never questioned it. That's when I realized how manipulative she could be. I ended things after 6 months. It wasn't because she was a bad person. I genuinely believed she needed help, but I couldn't handle the constant surveillance, the lack of privacy, the feeling of being smothered. When I broke up with her, she didn't just cry. She had a complete breakdown, alternating between begging me to stay and threatening to hurt herself. That's when the real nightmare began. The texts started flooding in. "I miss you so much. We can work this out. Please give us another chance." When I didn't respond, the tone changed dramatically. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do. You're going to regret this." I blocked her number, but that only escalated things. She created new email addresses, new social media accounts, new ways to contact me. Then the notes started appearing on my car, handwritten messages tucked under my windshield wipers. I'm watching you. You can't ignore me forever. We're meant to be together. One evening, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart nearly stopped. Inside, things had been moved around, not ransacked, but deliberately rearranged. My coffee table books were in a different order. My clothes had been reorganized in my closet. There was a framed photo of us that I'd taken down after the breakup, now sitting prominently on my bedside table. The most disturbing part, I found a series of photographs scattered on my bed, pictures of me going about my daily routine. Completely unaware I was being photographed. There was one of me getting coffee, another of me at the gym, one of me having lunch with Marcus. She'd been following me, documenting my every move. I went to the police, but their hands were tied. They said they couldn't do much unless she made an explicit threat or physically harmed me. I installed new locks, set up security cameras, but somehow she still found ways to get to me. She started showing up at places she knew I'd be, my favorite restaurants, the art supply store, even my dentist's office. She'd just sit there, watching me with this unsettling smile, as if everything was completely normal. When I confronted her, she'd act innocent. Oh, I just needed to pick up some supplies. Or what a coincidence, running into you here. The final straw came when she began harassing my friends. She'd send Marcus and Jessica long, rambling messages about how they needed to convince me to take her back. She'd wait outside their apartment, trying to catch them to talk about me. They had to block her number and social media accounts, but she kept finding new ways to contact them. I finally got a restraining order, but it felt like just a piece of paper. She became more subtle, but didn't stop. I'd still catch glimpses of her car following me, or find little signs that she'd been in my apartment. A moved book, a slightly opened drawer, a coffee mug placed differently than I'd left it. Now, months later, I still live in constant awareness. I check my locks multiple times before going to bed. I vary my routine so she can't predict where I'll be. I look over my shoulder when I'm walking home. The worst part is the psychological toll. Never knowing when or where she'll appear next. Always feeling watched. For anyone reading this who might be experiencing something similar, please take it seriously from the start. What might seem like intense affection or devotion can quickly turn into something much darker. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. The experience has changed how I approach relationships and trust. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the signs of possessive behavior, but I refuse to let fear control my life. I'm sharing this story not just as a warning, but as a reminder that no one deserves to live in fear of someone who claims to love them. I'm I'm a 29-year-old woman, and my partner Raven is 23. We recently visited her hometown, a small mountain village nestled between towering peaks. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and outsiders stick out like sore thumbs. During our visit, Raven wanted to catch up with her old high school friend Alex, whom she hadn't seen in years. We agreed to meet him at the local viewpoint, a popular spot overlooking the valley. From the moment he arrived, something felt off. He immediately started making inappropriate comments about having a threesome and kept making overtly sexual jokes about our relationship, while we're unfortunately used to some level of fetishization. Hearing it from someone who was supposed to be an old friend made it particularly uncomfortable. Raven and I kept exchanging worried glances throughout the conversation. When Alex stepped away to take a phone call, she whispered that he'd never acted like this before and suggested we make an excuse to leave. When he returned, we mentioned wanting to grab dinner at Mountain Lodge, the only decent bar in town. Instead of taking the hint, he insisted on joining us. The bar was a rustic place with wooden beams and antler decorations. Typical mountain town aesthetic. The bartender, Jack, was a friendly older man who seemed to know everyone by name. Alex claimed he wasn't sure about the route to the lodge and asked to follow our car. Something about his insistence made my stomach turn, but we reluctantly agreed. We ordered drinks and food, then moved to the outdoor patio with its stunning view of the sunset-painted peaks. Alex's behavior improved slightly. He was less crude, more like the friend Raven had described from her past. The food came quickly, and we ate while making casual conversation. The moment felt almost normal, but something still felt wrong. Halfway through my first drink, I started feeling unusually tired. Raven caught my eye, our signal that it was time to go. We made excuses about needing to check on her grandmother, who was expecting us. Alex kept pushing us to come back to his place, promising good whiskey and introducing us to his cats. His persistence was becoming increasingly unsettling. We finally made it to our cars, parked side by side in the gravel lot. Just as we were about to leave, Alex signaled for us to roll down the window. He claimed his GPS was acting up and asked if we could lead him to the main road. Given the remote location and winding mountain roads, it seemed like a reasonable request. As we drove through the darkness, with Alex's headlights behind us, Raven admitted she'd noticed a strange bitter taste in her drink. This explained why she'd wanted to leave without finishing it. She was already suspicious of his behavior, which was why she'd suggested we leave rather than stay at the bar. The mountain roads twisted through the darkness, and Alex stayed behind us long after he should have turned off toward his place. When we reached a 2-lane stretch, his car suddenly pulled up beside us. He was waving something through his window, Raven's phone. We pulled over, and he returned it, making a hasty retreat. Here's what makes this truly terrifying. Raven had her phone in her fanny pack, which stayed on the table with our other belongings. She never took it out. We left the bar at the same time as Alex, meaning he must have taken it while we were still there, while casually saying goodbye and walking to the cars with us. The real chiller came when Raven revealed she deliberately flashed the knife she keeps in her jacket when he approached our car to return the phone. I hadn't noticed this at the time, but it explained his abrupt departure. If his intentions were innocent, why would he flee at the sight of a weapon? Why not question why his old friend would flash a knife at him? Looking back, several things are disturbingly clear. First, he stole the phone to force us to stop on a dark mountain road. Second, he retreated immediately when Raven showed she was armed, suggesting he had malicious intentions. Third, there's a strong possibility he tried to drug our drinks. Raven noticed the bitter taste and stopped drinking, while I finished half of mine and felt unnaturally tired. The logistics still baffle me. How did he manage to swipe the phone without us noticing? How could he have tampered with our drinks when we were watching them? Was the bartender, Jack, somehow involved, despite suggesting the bar ourselves? The whole experience has left us questioning everything and everyone. This incident transformed Raven's childhood friend into a predator in our minds. His earlier sexual comments now seem less like bad jokes and more like threatening intentions. His insistence on following us, the stolen phone, the possible drugging attempt. It all points to a carefully planned attack that we narrowly escaped. Mountain towns might look peaceful and friendly, but darkness can lurk anywhere. What started as a simple meetup with an old friend turned into a night that could have ended very differently if we hadn't trusted our instincts and stayed alert. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who hide behind familiar faces and friendly smiles. Last October, my peaceful mountain home turned into a scene from a nightmare. A devastating storm had torn through our region, leaving significant damage in its wake. The roof of my house had suffered extensive damage, with water pouring in through multiple breaches. As someone who works remotely as an IT specialist, this situation was more than just an inconvenience. It was a threat to my livelihood. Living in the Rocky Mountains meant my options for temporary accommodation were limited. After hours of searching, I found only one suitable rental property within reasonable distance. A modest cabin about 40 minutes drive into an even more remote part of the mountains. The price was surprisingly low, which should have been my first warning sign. The journey there was nerve-wracking. The storm had left the mountain roads treacherous, with fallen branches and loose gravel everywhere. When I finally arrived at the cabin, Exhaustion had completely overtaken me. I barely registered the eerie silence of the surrounding forest or the complete absence of other properties nearby. The first warning sign came early the next morning. I was setting up my workstation when someone knocked on the door. Through the window, I could make out a man standing on the porch. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, wearing a thick leather jacket despite the warm weather. His neck was covered in peculiar tribal tattoos that seemed to crawl up toward his jaw. Something about his presence felt deeply wrong. I decided not to answer. The day passed uneventfully as I buried myself in work, trying to catch up on projects delayed by the move. I didn't leave my makeshift desk until 8 in the evening, when hunger finally forced me to take a break. Just as I was finishing my microwave dinner, another knock echoed through the cabin. Looking through the window, I saw the same man from the morning, still wearing that leather jacket, still bearing that unsettling presence. Around 11 at night, I decided to push through one more hour of work. With my headphones on, I immersed myself in coding, desperate to meet my deadlines. The darkness outside had become absolute, with only my laptop screen providing illumination. When I finally closed my computer, feeling satisfied with my progress, a bone-chilling discovery awaited me. As I switched on the hallway light, my blood froze. Wet boot prints marked the wooden floor, leading from the back door all the way to my workspace. They were fresh, still glistening in the artificial light. Following their trail with trembling steps, I found the back door slightly ajar, letting in the cold mountain air. Before I could process this horror, footsteps creaked on the stairs above. They were slow, deliberate, like someone trying to move stealthily, but failing. At the bottom of the staircase, the tattooed man emerged from the shadows. His face showed surprise at seeing me awake, quickly morphing into something far more sinister. A cold, calculating anger that made my skin crawl. Pure survival instinct took over. Without a word, I bolted through the back door into the darkness. The dense forest beyond the cabin offered my only chance of escape. I could hear heavy footsteps pursuing me as I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping against my face. Finding shelter behind a massive pine tree, I fumbled with my phone, trying to dial emergency services. The sound of footsteps approaching made me freeze mid-dial. The man ran past my hiding spot, his boots crunching on fallen leaves as he continued deeper into the forest. Once his footsteps faded into the distance, I managed to call for help. The police arrived 20 minutes later, finding me still trembling behind that same tree. The following day, they caught him at a gas station 50 miles away. His distinctive tattoos made him easily identifiable. The investigation revealed he was Robert Wolf King, a fugitive wanted for a string of violent home invasions in the area. The detectives told me He had been using vacant properties as hunting grounds, studying his victims' patterns before attacking. The thought of him watching me work, standing right behind my chair while I sat oblivious with my headphones on, still haunts my dreams. I'll never know why he chose to let me work undisturbed that day, but I'm grateful my story didn't end like some of his previous victims. My job as a wildlife photographer often takes me to remote locations, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was driving back from a 3-day assignment, photographing black bears in their natural habitat. The autumn fog had settled thick among the trees, reducing visibility to mere feet ahead of my truck. The fuel gauge had been warning me for the past 30 minutes, and my GPS showed no signs of civilization nearby, just endless winding mountain roads cutting through dense forest. The rain started falling harder, drumming against my windshield like thousands of tiny hammers. That's when I spotted a sign through the fog, faded and weather-beaten, promising gas just half a mile ahead. The station materialized out of the mist like a ghost. It was tiny, with just 2 pumps huddled under a rusted metal awning. Behind them stood a small convenience store, its windows covered in years of grime. The whole place looked like it had been forgotten by time, but I had no choice. My fuel gauge was now well below empty. I pulled up to the nearest pump, the gravel crunching ominously under my tires. The digital display was dead, not even a flicker of life. Frustrated, I tried the other pump with the same result. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I noticed a dim light glowing from inside the store. Maybe someone could help. The door squealed on its hinges as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty space. The interior looked like a disaster zone. Shelves were overturned, their contents scattered across the floor. The light I'd seen came from an old battery-powered camping lantern placed on the counter at the back of the store. Something felt terribly wrong. The destruction looked recent. There was barely any dust on the fallen merchandise. As I turned to leave, movement caught my eye. A figure stood by my truck, examining it closely. They were completely drenched, their dark clothes clinging to their frame as they peered into my windows. "Hey," I called out, my voice carrying through the rain. The person snapped their head toward me, then looked past me. Before I could react, heavy footsteps sounded behind me. A man emerged from the back room, his long dark hair plastered to his face, eyes sunken and wild. There was something sickly about his appearance, something that made my skin crawl. He made no attempt to speak, instead lunging forward with surprising speed. I barely made it back to my truck, hearing the screech of metal against metal as something, probably a knife, scraped along my door as I pulled away. The last thing I saw in my rearview mirror was the second figure backing away into the darkness. As the first man stood in the rain, watching my departure, driving on fumes, I managed to reach a real gas station 30 minutes later. The attendant's face went pale when I mentioned the abandoned station. It had been closed for over 15 years after a series of mysterious disappearances in the area. When police investigated my report, they found fresh evidence of people living their empty food containers, makeshift beds, and disturbingly personal belongings that may have belonged to missing travelers. I later learned that several other people had encountered similar experiences at that station, but not all of them managed to escape. The knife marks on my truck door serve as a constant reminder of how close I came to becoming another statistic in the mountain's dark history. To this day, I take extra care to fuel up before heading into remote areas, and I never stop at stations that aren't clearly visible on my GPS. I had been staying with my old university friend Marcus in his hometown, a small logging community in northern Oregon. We spent most of the week revisiting old memories and exploring the local area. On my last evening there, Marcus suggested we check out something that had been piquing his curiosity: an abandoned paper mill a few miles into the dense forest. The local stories about the mill fascinated me. It had been suddenly abandoned in the 1970s, with all the machinery and equipment left exactly as it was on the last working day. Some locals claimed they still saw lights in the windows at night, though the power had been cut off decades ago. We started our hike through the forest just as the sun was beginning to set. The well-worn trail eventually gave way to a barely visible path through the undergrowth. After about an hour of walking, the trees began to thin out, revealing several large industrial buildings looming ahead of us. The mill wasn't what either of us expected. Instead of a decrepit ruin, the buildings looked surprisingly intact. Modern aluminum siding covered the walls, and the windows, though grimy, were unbroken. A narrow gravel road connected the buildings, suggesting this place wasn't as abandoned as we'd been led to believe. We were examining the first building when a loud metallic slam echoed through the trees. Both of us jumped, instinctively ducking behind some overgrown bushes. We waited in silence, hearts pounding. "Hello," a voice called out from somewhere ahead. Marcus and I remained still, unsure whether to respond. Through the gathering dusk, we could see someone standing in the road between the buildings. They appeared to be an older man, his outline barely visible in the fading light. "I know you're there," he called again, his voice carrying a strange, hollow quality. "I just want to talk. Something felt wrong. Very wrong." The man's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the buildings themselves were speaking. Despite the deepening darkness, he cast no shadow in the dim remaining light. Marcus grabbed my arm and whispered, "Look at the ground near his feet." I followed his gaze and felt my blood run cold. Where the man's feet should have been touching the gravel, there was nothing. He appeared to be floating several inches above the ground. Before we could process this impossibility, he turned and looked directly at our hiding spot, his face devoid of any expression. Without a word, we both turned and ran. The sound of footsteps behind us spurred us to run faster, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for the path. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we burst out of the woods and didn't stop until we reached Marcus's car. Back at his house, we tried to make sense of what we'd seen. The next morning, I helped Marcus research the mill's history. What we found chilled us to the bone. In 1976, the mill's night watchman had disappeared without a trace. The only clue was a set of footprints that started in the middle of the gravel road and simply ended as if the person making them had vanished into thin air. Further investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Every few years since then, someone else would disappear in those woods, always near the mill. The last person to go missing was just 2 months before our visit. Local police found their flashlight lying in the middle of that same gravel road, still switched on. I left town the next day, but Marcus kept me updated on the mill. A week after our encounter, he convinced some local historians to help him research the site. They discovered that the modern buildings we saw couldn't possibly exist. The mill had burned down in 1982. All that should have remained were concrete foundations and rusted machinery. Whatever we encountered that night wasn't human. The figure who spoke to us wanted something, and I'm thankful we didn't stick around to find out what it was. Some places are best left unexplored, their secrets buried in time. That mill, whether it exists in our reality or another, is definitely one of them. I had discovered an intriguing trail in Olympic National Park, a challenging 6-day round trip through some of the most remote wilderness in Washington state. The route wasn't well known, which appealed to my desire for solitude. Being an experienced backpacker, I was comfortable with the isolation that came with these longer treks. On my 3rd day out, I came across another hiker at one of the designated campsites. He was setting up his tent when I arrived, his gear looking well worn but professional. He introduced himself as Daniel, an environmental photographer working on a project about endangered forest ecosystems. We shared trail stories over my freeze-dried dinner, and he mentioned he'd be heading to the summit the next day, the same destination I had planned. The following morning, I packed up early and started the final ascent. The views were breathtaking, ancient forests giving way to alpine meadows, with snow-capped peaks piercing the clouds in the distance. I reached my planned camping spot by mid-afternoon, but Daniel never showed up. I found it odd given his stated intentions, but assumed he'd changed his plans or was taking his time photographing along the way. The isolation at the summit was profound. No cell service, no other hikers, just the sound of wind whispering through the mountain heather. As darkness fell, I was still the only person at the campsite. Something about Daniel's absence niggled at my mind, but I reasoned that plans often change on long hikes. That night, I woke to an unfamiliar sound. Through the walls of my tent, I caught a glimpse of a faint light moving in the distance. My first thought was that Daniel had arrived late, but the light wasn't following any trail. It was stationary, hovering in the darkness about 40 yards from my tent. As I watched, the light dimmed slightly, then disappeared completely. A sense of unease crept over me. I unzipped my tent and called out, asking if anyone was there. The mountain remained silent, just as I was about to retreat back inside. I noticed something that made my heart skip a person, standing motionless in the shadows, barely visible in the starlight. They were too far away to make out clearly, but something about their stance felt wrong, unnatural. "Hello," I called out again, my voice shaky. The figure remained still, but I could feel them watching me. Then, without warning, my headlamp, which had been sitting just outside my tent, flickered on by itself. In that brief flash of light, I saw that the person was much closer now, perhaps 20 feet away, but they cast no shadow against the rocky ground. Pure instinct took over. I grabbed my emergency pack and bolted from the tent, not even bothering to put on my boots. I ran down the trail I'd ascended earlier, using only starlight to guide my way. Behind me, I heard footsteps, but they didn't sound like boots on rock, more like whispers of movement. Eerily quiet despite the loose scree covering the ground. I ran until my lungs burned, finally stopping at the next designated campsite 3 miles down. As I caught my breath, I realized the footsteps had stopped. The rest of the night, I spent huddled in the camp's emergency shelter, too terrified to sleep. At first light, I hiked out to the ranger station and reported what had happened. The ranger's face grew pale as I described Daniel and the figure I'd seen. 2 weeks earlier, they'd found an abandoned campsite at the summit tent, still set up. Camera equipment inside, but no sign of the hiker. The missing person report included a photo. It was Daniel, but not the Daniel I'd met. The real Daniel had disappeared 3 months ago. The investigation revealed other unsettling details. Every few years, hikers would report meeting a friendly photographer at that same campsite, always the night before they planned to reach the summit. Some of them later disappeared without a trace. Those who survived all described seeing a figure watching them from the darkness, and lights that seemed to move against the wind. I received an email from the Park Service 6 months later, Niles' journal in his tent. The final entry described meeting another hiker at his campsite. Someone who seemed friendly but felt wrong somehow. The entry ended mid-sentence. Whatever I encountered on that mountain wasn't human. I've spent countless hours trying to rationalize what happened. But one thing remains clear. Something prowls those remote peaks, wearing the faces of those it takes, luring new victims with false companionship. I still backpack, but never alone, and never in Olympic National Park. I had booked a quaint cottage through a vacation rental app in northern Vermont. The trip was for a crucial business, meeting with a potential investor who lived in the area. Having never visited this part of the state before, I was struck by how the dense maple forests seemed to swallow the scattered houses whole, their autumn colors creating a vibrant, but somehow unsettling canopy. The evening air was thick with fog. When I pulled into the narrow driveway, the cottage sat nestled among towering old trees, their branches stretching over the roof like gnarled fingers. As I stepped out of my car, movement caught my eye, a figure walking slowly along the misty street. Something about their deliberate pace made me uneasy, though I couldn't explain why. The cottage was exactly as advertised. A cozy 2-bedroom structure with rustic charm. After bringing in my luggage, I decided to get my laptop from the car. Opening the front door, I froze. The person I'd seen earlier was now standing motionless in the middle of the street, facing the cottage. The fog had thickened, but I could make out their silhouette tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what appeared to be a heavy coat despite the mild weather. As I hesitantly stepped toward my car, they noticed my presence. Without a word, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the mist. Something about their behavior sent chills down my spine. I quickly retrieved my laptop and pulled my car into the garage, making sure to lock every door and window before settling in for the night. Throughout the evening, I found myself checking the street periodically, but there was no sign of the stranger. The fog had grown so dense that I could barely see past the front yard. Having to wake up early for my meeting, I decided to get some sleep around 10. My alarm jolted me awake at 4 in the morning. The house was still dark, but something felt off. There was light seeping under my bedroom door. A light I was certain I'd turned off before going to bed. Still groggy, I assumed I must have forgotten. But then I heard it, subtle movements coming from the living room. I crept to the bedroom door, my heart pounding. The sound continued. Someone was definitely in the house. Opening the door quietly, I saw the living room light was indeed on. The noise was coming from the corner where I'd left my briefcase. A man was crouched over it, methodically going through its contents. He matched the figure I'd seen earlier, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy dark coat. But now I could see his face, weathered and expressionless. as if he'd done this countless times before. When he turned and saw me, his lack of surprise was terrifying. His face remained calm, almost expectant, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Stay right there," he commanded, his voice carrying an edge of practiced authority. He began moving toward me with slow, calculated steps. In that split second, I had to decide fight, flight, or freeze. I chose flight, slamming my bedroom door shut just as he lunged forward. I could hear him immediately working on the lock as I frantically opened the window and climbed out. The foggy darkness enveloped me as I ran, my bare feet barely feeling the cold ground. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where I finally called the police. By the time they arrived, the man was gone, along with my briefcase and laptop. The real horror came during their investigation. They found evidence he'd been in the house before I even arrived, probably watching me from the moment I checked in. The detective later revealed this wasn't an isolated incident. Several similar break-ins had occurred in vacation rentals across the region. The perpetrator's method was always the same: observe the victim for hours, sometimes days, before making his move. They believed he specifically targeted business travelers, using rental listings to identify potential victims. They never caught him, but the incident changed how I travel forever. Those hours he spent watching me, planning, waiting for the right moment. It haunts me more than the actual break-in. Sometimes, on foggy evenings, I still imagine a figure standing in the street, patiently waiting for their next opportunity. Deep in the Adirondack Mountains, there's a crystal clear lake that few people know about. I'd been camping there for years, drawn to its pristine waters and the absolute solitude it offered. The lake was small enough to see across, surrounded by a sandy beach that gave way to dense pine forest. It was my perfect escape from the chaos of city life. This spring, I decided to spend a long weekend there, setting up my usual spot near the water's edge. The weather was perfect: warm days and cool nights, ideal for camping. When I arrived, the lake was deserted as usual. The silence was broken only by the gentle lapping of waves and the occasional call of a loon. Hours after setting up camp, I noticed movement across the lake. Someone had emerged from the tree line and was setting up a tent. Through my binoculars, I could see it was a man, probably in his 40s, methodically going about his camping routine. It was unusual to see anyone else here, but I figured he must be another outdoor enthusiast who discovered this hidden gem. As the sun began to set, I saw him making his way around the lake toward my campsite. He moved deliberately, keeping close to the water's edge. When he reached my camp, he introduced himself as Peter, an avid fisherman who'd heard about the lake from a local guide. We talked about fishing spots and camping experiences, and he seemed knowledgeable enough. Still, something about his presence felt off, like a wrong note in an otherwise perfect melody. Peter stayed for about 30 minutes before heading back to his site across the lake. As darkness fell, I noticed his campfire had gone out early. I assumed he'd turned in for the night, but something kept me on edge. The usual nighttime sounds of the forest seemed muted, as if the wildlife was holding its breath. I was sitting by my small campfire when I heard it. Footsteps in the woods behind my tent. The sound was too deliberate to be an animal. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight, but saw nothing. The footsteps continued, circling my campsite just beyond the reach of my light. Then they stopped suddenly, replaced by complete silence. Looking across the lake, I noticed Peter's tent was dark, but something wasn't right. In the dim moonlight, I could see the tent flap was wide open, swaying slightly in the breeze. My instincts screamed that something was very wrong. I killed my campfire and retreated to my tent, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. Then I heard another sound, metal scraping against metal, coming from the direction of my cooler. Peering through a gap in my tent, I saw a figure crouched beside it. It was Peter, but he looked different. His movements were predatory, precise. When he stood up, I could see he was holding something that glinted in the moonlight. Without warning, the beam of a bright flashlight cut through the darkness from the tree line. Peter spun around, startled. A voice called out, "Park rangers, stay where you are." Peter bolted into the forest, with 2 rangers in pursuit. I emerged from my tent, shaking. As a 3rd ranger approached me, the truth came out during their investigation. Peter wasn't his real name, and he wasn't a fisherman. He was a survivalist who'd been living off the grid, breaking into camping sites across the Adirondacks. The rangers had been tracking him for weeks after several campers reported equipment theft and threatening encounters. What they found at his campsite chilled me to the bone, journals detailing his observations of previous campers, including how long they slept and when they were most vulnerable. The rangers had noticed his pattern of targeting solo campers in remote locations and had been monitoring the lake, knowing it was a perfect spot for his type of operation. They found maps marking other isolated lakes, with notes about the best times to strike and escape routes through the wilderness. They never caught him that night. He seemed to vanish into the forest, leaving behind only his elaborate plans and the disturbing evidence of how long he'd been watching people like me. The rangers installed cameras around the lake after that, but I've never gone back. Some nights, I still wonder what might have happened if they hadn't shown up when they did. The lake's pristine waters now hold darker reflections, and its solitude carries a warning rather than peace. I was driving from Seattle to Minneapolis in the dead of winter, a journey that would take nearly 3 days, through some of the most isolated parts of the northern states. I'd planned my overnight stays carefully, booking small vacation rentals instead of hotels to break up the monotony of the long drive. My first night's accommodation was in eastern Montana, where the population thins out and civilization seems to fade into the vast winter landscape. The storm started as I crossed the state line, transforming the world into a whirling mass of white. The temperature display on my dashboard showed 15 degrees below zero and falling. The small town where I'd booked my stay was barely visible through the blizzard. It was the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked, maybe 5 blocks long, with a single blinking traffic light at its center. The streets were completely empty, the few businesses already closed for the night. Snow had piled up against buildings, creating strange, looming shapes in the darkness. Following my GPS, I turned onto a narrow road that led to my rental. The property was a small cabin set back from the main house, surrounded by towering spruce trees laden with snow. The driveway was long and unplowed, forcing me to park to the side and trudge through knee-deep snow to reach the cabin. Using the keypad code, I let myself in and quickly closed the door against the biting wind. The cabin was small, maybe 500 square feet, with just a living room, bedroom, and bathroom. I took off my snow-covered boots and dropped my overnight bag by the bed, then sat on the couch to rest my eyes after the long drive. A heavy thump from the bedroom startled me. I looked toward the doorway I'd just come through, my heart racing. The sound had been loud and distinct, like something heavy falling or someone moving. I stood up and walked to the bedroom, flipping on the light. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. But when I went to check the small bathroom, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The bedroom closet door was shut tight, even though I distinctly remembered seeing it open when I first arrived. I approached the closet cautiously, my hand reaching for the handle. It wouldn't budge. The door seemed to be locked from the inside. At first, I tried to rationalize it as a maintenance closet. But then, I remembered seeing regular clothing hangers inside when I'd first arrived. I returned to the living room, my mind racing with possibilities. Looking out the window, I could barely see anything through the intensifying storm. The main house was just a dark shape in the swirling snow. That's when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow passing through the bedroom doorway. Turning around, I saw a large man standing there. His face was weathered and tired, covered in small cuts and bruises. He didn't say a word as he walked into the room, knelt down, and pulled a worn duffel bag from under the bed. A bag I hadn't noticed before. Then, without even glancing in my direction, he calmly walked past me and out the front door into the storm. Shaking, I ran to the door and watched through the window as his dark figure disappeared into the white void of the blizzard. I immediately called the police, but by the time they arrived, his tracks had been completely covered by the falling snow. When they questioned the property owner, she was shocked. She lived alone, and the cabin had been locked up tight for days before my arrival. The police investigation revealed something disturbing. There was evidence someone had been living in that closet for at least a week. They found food wrappers, empty water bottles, and a makeshift bedroll hidden behind some storage boxes. In the following weeks, similar reports emerged from other rental properties in the area. A man matching the same description had been spotted multiple times, always during severe weather when visibility was poor. The theory was that he used these conditions to move between properties undetected, hiding in closets and crawl spaces until he needed to move on. I never found out who he was or why he chose to reveal himself to me that night. Maybe the storm had forced him to move sooner than planned, or perhaps he knew the police would eventually be called. What haunts me most is the thought of him lying there in that closet, listening to me move around the cabin, waiting for the right moment to make his escape. These days, I always check every closet and hidden space when I check into a rental property. Some might call it paranoia, but I know firsthand that sometimes the monsters in our closets are very real indeed. Working late-night food delivery wasn't my ideal job, but it helped pay for graduate school. Most nights were uneventful, just tired office workers and college students ordering midnight snacks. That changed one particularly cold October night, around 1:30 in the morning. The order came in for delivery to the old Riverside Medical Center, a massive brick building that had been converted into office spaces. I'd delivered there before, but only during regular business hours. The delivery instructions specified leaving the food outside room 328. Something about that number tickled the back of my mind, but I couldn't place why. The parking lot was completely empty when I arrived, my headlights sweeping across rows of vacant spaces. A single light burned above the main entrance, creating a small pool of yellow illumination in the darkness. The rest of the building loomed black and silent, its windows like empty eyes staring down at me. Inside, the lobby lights were dimmed but on. A directory board listed various businesses, but most of the nameplates were empty. My footsteps echoed off the marble floors as I made my way to the stairwell. The elevator was out of service, according to a handwritten sign. The second floor was darker, with only emergency lights casting a weak glow. The hallway stretched out before me, lined with closed doors bearing brass numbers. About halfway down, a flickering fluorescent light created unsettling shadows that seemed to move and dance along the walls. Just as I reached the third floor, I heard footsteps coming from somewhere above, slow and deliberate. I paused, listening. The steps continued for a moment, then stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, expectant. Room 328 was at the far end of the corridor. As I approached, I noticed something odd. Unlike the other offices, which had business names on their doors, this one was completely blank. The number plate looked newer than the others, almost as if it had been recently replaced. Then I remembered why that number had bothered me. Last week, another driver had mentioned a strange delivery to this same room. He'd refused to elaborate, just saying he wouldn't take orders to this address anymore. Movement caught my eye. A man stepped out of one of the darkened doorways further down the hall. He wore casual clothes, not business attire, and something about his presence felt wrong. He pointed past me at room 328 and spoke in a flat voice. "Just leave it by the door." I stood frozen, my instincts screaming that something wasn't right. The man didn't move, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. After what felt like an eternity, I set the food down and began backing away toward the stairs. The man didn't follow, but I heard his footsteps enter the stairwell above me as I descended. Looking up through the gap between the stairs, I caught glimpses of two more figures on the upper floors, moving quietly but purposefully. I made it to my car and sped away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The next day, police contacted me. The building had reported a break-in, and security cameras had caught my delivery. As it turned out, I wasn't the first delivery driver to be used as an unwitting accomplice. The investigation revealed that a group of thieves had been systematically robbing offices in the building. They would place delivery orders late at night, using the drivers as cover to move around the building without arousing suspicion. The man I'd seen was one of 3 suspects, all of whom were caught on camera that night carrying stolen equipment down the back stairs while I was making my delivery. Room 328 didn't actually exist. They had placed a fake number plate on a utility door to create a believable delivery location. The police found tools and stolen items stashed behind that door, ready to be moved out during the next delivery. I quit the delivery job shortly after. The thought of how close I'd come to walking into their operation still makes me uneasy. Now, when I see delivery drivers working late at night, I wonder if they know what kind of situations they might be walking into, or whose plans they might unknowingly be part of. My husband and I had been looking forward to our annual vacation for months. This year, we'd booked a remote cabin in the North Cascades of Washington, a place where cell phones wouldn't work, and the nearest town was 2 hours away, perfect for escaping the chaos of our busy lives in the city. The cabin itself was a small masterpiece of rustic architecture, nestled between towering Douglas firs and overlooking a pristine mountain lake. The owner had warned us about the isolation, mentioning that we'd be the only people for miles around. That was exactly what we wanted, or so we thought. We arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. The cabin was everything the photos had promised. A cozy one-room structure with a loft bedroom accessed by a wooden ladder. The living area had a stone fireplace, and the kitchen was small but well equipped. We unpacked our groceries and settled in for what we hoped would be 3 days of peaceful relaxation. The first signs of something wrong came around 11 that night. We were enjoying wine by the fireplace when we heard footsteps in the grass outside. They were deliberate and slow, circling the cabin. At first, we assumed it was a deer or elk. The owner had mentioned plenty of wildlife in the area, but these steps sounded too measured, too purposeful to be an animal. I looked at my husband, seeing my own unease reflected in his face. He stood up and checked the windows, but the darkness outside was absolute. The footsteps continued their circuit around the cabin, then suddenly stopped behind the building. We held our breath, listening. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the footsteps. Just as we were beginning to relax, a distinct thump echoed from the roof. Someone was up there. My husband grabbed the fireplace poker, our only potential weapon, while I backed away from the windows. For 45 agonizing minutes, we could hear occasional footsteps crossing the roof, followed by long periods of silence. Then we heard boots hit the ground outside, followed by the sound of someone walking away into the forest. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin's timber frame. When the first light of dawn finally crept through the windows, we ventured outside. What we found chilled us to the bone. A series of boot prints in the dew-covered grass, circling the cabin exactly as we'd heard. But there was something else, similar prints in the dirt around the cabin that looked older, as if someone had been making these circuits for days before we arrived. My husband went to check our car while I examined the cabin's exterior. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Scratches around the loft window, as if someone had been testing different ways to get inside. Looking closer at the window itself, I saw it was slightly ajar, not enough to notice from inside, but enough to allow someone to eventually work it open. We didn't wait to find out what might happen the next night. We packed our things and left immediately. Our dreams of a peaceful vacation shattered. The police investigation that followed revealed something deeply disturbing. They found a makeshift campsite in the woods behind the cabin, with evidence suggesting someone had been living there for weeks. Inside a weathered tent, they discovered a notebook filled with detailed observations of previous cabin guests. When they arrived, their routines, when they slept. There were notes about us too, written in the same meticulous hand. 2 people, man and woman, went to bed at 11. Light sleepers noticed the footsteps. The most terrifying detail came from the property owner. She mentioned that several guests over the past year had reported missing items. Small things at first, like food or drinks, but the last guests before us had woken up to find their camera moved from where they'd left it, with new photos on it, pictures taken of them while they slept. They never caught whoever was responsible. The campsite had been abandoned, leaving only questions about who had been watching the cabin and its occupants all this time. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed another night. Would we have woken up to find pictures of ourselves sleeping? Or would something worse have been waiting for us in that remote wilderness? The cabin's still available for rent. I checked recently out of morbid curiosity. The listing still promises perfect solitude and escape from the world. But now I know that sometimes, when you think you're alone in the wilderness, you're actually being watched by someone who knows exactly how isolated you are. I've owned my Victorian townhouse in Boston's historic district for nearly a decade, built in 1875. It's a 3-story masterpiece of period architecture, complete with ornate moldings and dark wood paneling. When my roommates moved out last year, I found myself alone in this massive space, using only 2 of the 6 bedrooms, my master suite, and what I'd converted into a home office. The unused rooms lay on the far side of the 3rd floor, separated from my living space by a long hallway. One room stored boxes of holiday decorations, while another sat completely empty. I rarely ventured into that wing of the house, especially at night. Something about those vacant rooms always felt wrong. After a particularly long day at the tech startup where I worked, I came home around 9 and headed straight to my office. Gaming had always been my way to decompress, and tonight I needed it badly. I settled into my chair, put on my noise-canceling headphones, and lost myself in the latest release of my favorite FPS game. 2 hours into my gaming session, I thought I heard something, a knock, or maybe a door closing. I lifted one side of my headphones, listening intently. The house remained silent, its old bones settling in the autumn chill. Deciding it was nothing, I returned to my game, leaving my office door open this time, just in case. The next interruption came a full match later. Through my headphones, I caught a sound that seemed out of place. Footsteps, maybe, or the rustle of movement. Again, I paused, removing my headphones completely. The silence felt heavy, expectant. I did a quick check of the house, making sure the front door was locked, before returning to my game. As the next round ended, and I leaned back in my chair, movement flashed in my peripheral vision. a dark shape passing quickly by my open doorway. My heart nearly stopped. I ripped off my headphones and jumped up, my chair rolling back against the wall. The hallway outside my office was empty, but the air felt different somehow, disturbed. Fear rooted me to the spot as my mind raced through possibilities. Had I imagined it? Was my tired brain playing tricks on me? But then I remembered the front door had been unlocked when I checked it. Even though I distinctly remembered locking it when I came home, a thorough search of the house revealed nothing at first. But when I reached the empty room at the end of the hall, my blood turned to ice. There were fresh scuff marks on the hardwood floor marks that led to the closet. A closet that, until now, I'd never been able to open. My hands trembled as I approached the door. The handle turned easily now, though I knew it had been locked for years. Inside, the beam of my flashlight revealed evidence that made my skin crawl. Someone had been living in there, sleeping, eating, watching. A small mattress lay on the floor, surrounded by food wrappers and water bottles. But what terrified me most was the small gap in the wall connecting to the house's old heating system. A passage that led to every room in the house. The police investigation uncovered the horrifying truth. The man they eventually caught had been living in my walls for at least 2 months, using the old heating ducts to move around unseen. He would come out at night while I slept or was distracted, taking food from my kitchen and using my utilities. The scuff marks by the closet were from him dragging in a mattress while I was at work. The most disturbing evidence came from his phone, which they found charging in the closet. He had dozens of photos, me working in my office, sleeping in my bed, eating dinner in my kitchen. He had documented my daily routine in detail, learning when I was most vulnerable. What's worse, he had similar photos from other houses in the neighborhood. He had been moving through the connected heating systems of these old townhouses, living in their walls and watching their inhabitants. They told me he had a master key to my house. He'd made a copy while working as a contractor for the previous owner years ago. He'd been waiting for me to live alone, knowing the empty rooms would give him the perfect hiding place. I sold the house soon after. The new owners renovated immediately, sealing up all the old heating ducts and installing modern security systems. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my new apartment, I still feel watched. I check my closets compulsively, knowing that some spaces can hide more than just darkness. The thought of him watching me for months, just feet away behind my walls, still keeps me awake at night. Between college classes, I worked nights as a rideshare driver in Denver. The flexibility suited my schedule, and the late-night crowd usually consisted of tired airport travelers or people heading home from restaurants. That November night started like any other, picking up passengers from 11 p.m. until what was supposed to be my last ride at 3 in the morning. The request came from an address deep in the industrial district, where abandoned warehouses lined empty streets. Most drivers avoided this area, but the surge pricing made it too tempting to pass up. The GPS led me down increasingly narrow roads until I reached what looked like an old textile factory, its brick walls rising like dark cliffs against the night sky. A single sodium lamp cast sickly orange light over the loading dock area. My app showed the pickup point just ahead, but something felt wrong about the whole situation. The factory's windows were dark, many of them broken, and no other cars were visible anywhere. Who would request a ride from here at this hour? I was about to cancel the ride when a sharp tap on the passenger window made me jump. A man stood there, his face half hidden in shadow. He was well dressed in what looked like expensive business clothes, but they seemed oddly out of place in this industrial wasteland. Something about his posture made me uneasy. He stood too still, like a predator waiting to strike. When I rolled down the window, he smiled thinly and asked if I could help him carry something to the car. He gestured toward the loading dock, where shadows seemed to move in the orange light. Every instinct told me to drive away, but before I could respond, he was already walking toward the dock, clearly expecting me to follow. I waited in my car, heart pounding. The man disappeared into the shadows by the loading dock, then emerged again, this time standing perfectly still and staring at my car. His stance had changed. There was something aggressive about it now. He called out, his voice echoing off the brick walls. "I really need your help with this." That's when I noticed movement behind him. 2 more figures emerging from the darkness. They moved with purpose, spreading out as if to surround my car. The first man remained motionless, watching me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I threw the car into reverse and accelerated away from the building, tires screeching on the broken pavement. In my rearview mirror, I saw all 3 men running not toward me, but toward a black van that had been hidden in the shadows of the building. I called the police as soon as I reached the main road. Their investigation revealed something horrifying. The factory had become a base of operations for a sophisticated crime ring. They had been using rideshare services to lure drivers to remote locations, stealing their cars and personal belongings. Some drivers had been held for hours, while the criminals used their phones and cards to drain their accounts. The detective showed me photos of items recovered from the factory: drivers, licenses, phones, and personal effects belonging to at least a dozen other drivers. They had been meticulously organizing their targets, using the app's surge pricing to tempt drivers into the area during the quietest hours of the night. Most disturbing were the detailed notes They kept descriptions of drivers, their vehicles, and their typical working hours. They had been watching the patterns of late-night drivers for weeks, learning when we were most likely to accept rides in remote areas. I recognized some of the names in their notes. Other drivers who had shared stories of strange pickup requests they'd refused. They never caught the men I saw that night. The van they escaped in had been stolen, and they seemed to vanish into the network of abandoned industrial buildings. The ride request had been made using a stolen phone and hacked account, leaving no trail to follow. I quit driving that night. The thought of how close I came to walking into their trap still haunts me. Now, when I see rideshare drivers working those late hours, I want to warn them about the dangers lurking in those surge pricing requests, about the predators who know exactly how to exploit our willingness to pick up just one more passenger. Living alone in my grandfather's old colonial house in rural Connecticut took some getting used to. Built in the 1920s, it was a 4-bedroom masterpiece of historic architecture, complete with original hardwood floors and intricate crown molding. The house sat on 2 acres of land, bordered by dense oak forest that turned the property into an island of isolation. Most of the bedrooms remained unused since I moved in. My master bedroom and the converted gaming room were all I really needed. The other 2 rooms, located at the far end of the upstairs hallway, mainly collected dust. One stored a few boxes of old photographs and holiday decorations, while the other remained completely empty. That night, after finishing a late shift at the hospital where I worked as a nurse, I decided to unwind with some online gaming. It was around 9:15 when I settled into my gaming room, put on my headset, and loaded up my favorite battle royale game. The house creaked and settled around me, its old timber frame adjusting to the autumn temperature drop. Sometime past midnight, the first strange sound filtered through my headphones, something like a knock or a door closing. I paused my game and listened intently, but the house had fallen back into its usual silence. Figuring it was just the old house settling, I resumed playing, though I left my gaming room door open this time, just in case. 2 more hours passed before I heard it again. This time, unmistakably, a sound of movement from somewhere in the house. I removed my headset completely and listened. The silence felt different somehow, heavier than usual. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Just as I was about to return to my game, a dark figure rushed past my open doorway, visible for only a split second in my peripheral vision. I leaped from my chair, my heart pounding against my ribs. The hallway outside was empty, but something felt terribly wrong. The air seemed disturbed, as if someone had just passed through it. Gathering my courage, I began searching the house. Everything appeared normal, until I reached the empty room at the end of the hall. The door was closed, though I always left it open. As I approached, my flashlight beam revealed fresh scuff marks on the hardwood floor marks that led straight to the closet. When I opened the closet door, my blood turned to ice. The space wasn't empty anymore. A sleeping bag lay crumpled in the corner, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and food wrappers. A phone charger snaked up the wall to an outlet I didn't even know existed. But what terrified me most was a notebook, open on top of the sleeping bag. The pages contained detailed observations of my daily routine. When I left for work, when I came home, which rooms I used, and when I typically went to bed. There were notes about my gaming sessions, including what times I wore my headset and wouldn't be able to hear anything else. The writing was meticulous, spanning at least 3 weeks. I ran from the house and called the police. Their investigation revealed that someone had been living in my home for nearly a month, moving around while I was at work or distracted with gaming. They found evidence that he had been entering through a window in the empty room, which had a broken latch I hadn't noticed. The most chilling discovery came from the security cameras at the hospital where I worked. They showed someone watching me in the parking lot multiple times over the past month. The same times noted in the notebook. He had been studying my routine both at home and at work, learning exactly when and how to move around my house undetected. They never caught him, but they found more notebooks in the closet. The earlier pages detailed observations of the previous homeowner, my grandfather, during his last months in the house. The intruder had been watching the property for far longer than I'd realized, waiting for the right moment to begin his occupation. I sold the house within a month. The new owners installed an extensive security system and motion detecting lights around the property. But sometimes, in my new apartment, I still feel watched. Every creak and groan makes me wonder if someone is learning my new routines, waiting for the perfect moment to slip into my life, unnoticed. The thought of him moving through my house while I sat unaware, headphones on and lost in my game, still haunts my dreams. The crisp mountain air whipped through my partially open window as I guided my old Subaru Outback along the winding roads of the Colorado Rockies. I was 19, finally heading off to start my freshman year at Colorado State, and my car was packed to the brim with everything I owned. The autumn leaves created a mesmerizing kaleidoscope of orange and red against the setting sun, but I couldn't fully appreciate their beauty. My mind was too preoccupied with thoughts of leaving home for the first time. My GPS indicated a 900-mile journey, which I had split into 2 days of driving. The mountain route I was taking wasn't the most direct path, but it offered the best views and fewer tourist traps. According to my phone, I should reach the small mountain lodge I'd booked by 11. But between the winding roads and inevitable stops, I knew it would be later. By 7:30, darkness had fully descended, transforming the scenic mountain route into an eerie tunnel of shadows. The traffic had thinned to almost nothing. Occasionally, headlights would appear in my rearview mirror, their beams dancing across the rocky walls before disappearing around a bend, leaving me alone once again. The solitude and monotonous drive were taking their toll. Around 10, I decided to stop at the next gas station to refuel and grab some coffee. About 15 minutes later, I spotted a small sign for Thunder Peak Gas and carefully navigated down the exit ramp. The gas station stood alone against the backdrop of towering pines and jagged peaks. It was a small wooden structure with just 2 pumps and a tiny convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, creating a small island of harsh illumination in the surrounding darkness. No other buildings or lights were visible in any direction. I pulled up to one of the pumps and got out, immediately wrapping my arms around myself against the biting mountain cold. As I began filling my tank, movement caught my eye. An elderly Native American woman emerged from the shadows near the store. She walked with purpose, her silver hair gleaming in the fluorescent light, wearing a traditional woven blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You should not be here, young one," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made me pause. Her weathered face showed genuine concern. "I'm sorry," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite my growing unease. She glanced around, as if checking for other listeners, before speaking again. "Take the service road behind the station. It will lead you back to the highway further north." I looked at her, confused, but that would add almost an hour to my trip. "The entrance ramp is right there." Her dark eyes met mine with an intensity that made me shiver. "The old path is safer tonight." Without another word, she turned and walked back toward the store, disappearing into the shadows as silently as she had appeared. I stood there, the gas pump clicking off automatically, trying to process this strange encounter. The entrance ramp she wanted me to avoid was a standard one-way road, well lit and properly maintained. It made no sense to take some back route instead. Following my instincts, I decided to ignore her cryptic warning. I replaced the pump, got back in my car, and drove toward the entrance ramp. As I merged onto the highway, I noticed that most of the street lights were out, leaving the road ahead in near total darkness. I slowed down, wondering if there was construction ahead. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision was my only warning before a massive black pickup truck suddenly appeared out of nowhere, screeching to a halt directly in front of my car. I slammed on my brakes, my heart pounding as I watched multiple doors fly open. In the weak glow of my headlights, I saw 4 figures emerge, moving with practiced efficiency, carrying what looked like baseball bats and longer objects I couldn't identify. Pure adrenaline took over. I threw my car into reverse, tires screaming against the asphalt as I backed away. Through my windshield, I caught glimpses of more shapes emerging from the darkness at the sides of the road, their movements predatory and purposeful. The group from the truck started running toward my car, their faces eerily expressionless in the beam of my headlights. I spun the wheel hard, completing a frantic 3-point turn, and floored the accelerator. In my rearview mirror, I saw several figures trying to chase my car before giving up. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely keep the wheel straight as I sped back to the gas station. Without slowing down, I found the service road the woman had mentioned and turned onto it, driving until I felt I was safely away from whatever I had just escaped. Only then did I pull over and call 911, my voice trembling as I reported what had happened. Strangely, I never received any follow-up from the police. It was as if my report had vanished into thin air. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was that the old woman had tried to warn me. I don't know what those people were planning to do, but given their organized approach and emotionless demeanor, I suspect I narrowly avoided becoming another missing person statistic in those beautiful but unforgiving mountains. Working as a pharmacy delivery driver wasn't the most glamorous job, but it helped cover my living expenses while I studied pharmacology at Portland State. Most of my deliveries were routine prescriptions to elderly patients or people too sick to drive. The pay was decent, especially during the night shifts when fewer drivers were willing to work. That Friday had started like any other evening shift. I'd been steadily delivering medications since 5, making my rounds through the suburban neighborhoods surrounding Portland. The autumn fog had rolled in early, creating an eerie atmosphere as it mixed with the yellow glow of street lamps. Around 8:30, things slowed down considerably. The dispatches became less frequent, and I found myself driving aimlessly through residential areas, waiting for the next call. Just when I was considering calling it a night, an order came through that caught my attention. The destination was 8 miles out, but the delivery premium made it worth the drive. I picked up the prescription from our 24-hour pharmacy hub and checked the details. It was a standard antibiotic prescription. Nothing unusual, but something about the delivery address made me pause. It was in an area I'd never serviced before, well beyond our usual delivery radius. The GPS led me away from the familiar suburban streets and into increasingly rural territory. After 20 minutes of driving, the houses became sparse, separated by vast fields shrouded in fog. The pavement eventually gave way to gravel, and my headlights created strange shadows as they cut through the mist. Finally, the GPS indicated I'd arrived, but what I saw made my stomach drop. Through the fog, I could barely make out a dilapidated farmhouse set far back from the road. A dirt driveway cut through an overgrown field, leading to the structure that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in decades. I parked at the entrance of the driveway, leaving my engine running as I double-checked the address. Everything matched, but something felt terribly wrong. The house was completely dark, except for a single porch light, which I realized was one of those solar-powered units that activate automatically at dusk. While I sat there debating what to do, high beams suddenly illuminated my rearview mirror. A vehicle had pulled up behind me, its lights so bright I was momentarily blinded. My heart started racing as I watched a figure emerge from the vehicle and approach my car. The man stopped beside my driver's side window, but didn't say anything. I rolled down my window slightly and asked if this was his prescription delivery. He remained silent, just standing there motionless. Then, without warning, he turned and looked back toward his vehicle. That's when my survival instincts kicked in. Something about his behavior, the isolated location, and the timing felt calculated. I hit the gas, my tires spitting gravel as I accelerated forward. In my mirrors, I saw the man running back to his vehicle. I sped down the road, taking random turns through the rural streets, constantly checking my mirrors. The vehicle followed for several minutes before finally turning off onto a side road. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to pull over once. I reached a well-lit gas station. I immediately called the police and my supervisor. When they investigated, they discovered the delivery address didn't exist in any property records. The prescription itself had been called in by a burner phone. What terrified me most was learning that several delivery drivers had gone missing in neighboring counties over the past year. I still work in pharmacy, but now I'm safely behind the counter at a retail location. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd gotten out of my car that night, or if I'd driven down that dark driveway. The incident taught me to always trust my instincts, especially when something doesn't feel right. The spring storm caught everyone by surprise. I'd spent the weekend photographing my best friend's wedding in Missoula, Montana, and was now making the long drive back to Seattle. Flying would have been easier, but I needed my photography equipment, and airline baggage handlers aren't exactly known for their gentle touch. The local weather report had mentioned possible rain, but nothing about the violent thunderstorm that was now illuminating the Montana sky with brilliant flashes of lightning. Heavy raindrops hammered against my windshield as I navigated the winding mountain roads, my wipers working overtime to maintain visibility. Most of the drive was through remote territory, far from major cities. The road twisted through dense forests and along steep cliff edges, with warning signs about wildlife crossings every few miles. I'd been driving for 8 hours and still had another 3 to go before reaching my booked hotel in Coeur d'Alene. Around 10:30, I noticed my gas gauge dropping dangerously low. The storm had forced me to take a longer route, and I hadn't passed a gas station in over an hour. My GPS showed a small town called Thunder Creek, about 20 miles ahead. But in this weather, I wasn't sure I'd make it. Just when I was starting to seriously worry, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. The vehicle was approaching fast, much too fast for these treacherous conditions. Within seconds, a massive black SUV was right on my tail, its high beams reflecting blindingly in my mirrors. I couldn't see anything about the driver, but their aggressive behavior made my heart race. The road was too narrow and winding to let them pass safely, especially in this weather. We continued like this for almost 10 minutes, the SUV maintaining an uncomfortably close distance. Then, without warning, the vehicle's lights completely shut off. In the pitch darkness, I could barely make out its outline behind me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I realized how strange and deliberate this behavior seemed. Who turns off their lights in the middle of a storm? I maintained my speed, keeping my eyes glued to the mirrors, straining to see the dark shape following me. Relief flooded through me when I spotted a sign for a gas station just 2 miles ahead. As I took the exit ramp, the SUV suddenly accelerated, passing dangerously close to my car before disappearing into the night. Shaken but grateful for the escape, I pulled into the gas station. It was a small, run-down place with only 2 pumps, but the lights were on, and I could see movement inside the store. As I started filling my tank, I kept scanning the darkness, half expecting the SUV to return. The storm was intensifying, with lightning now striking so close that the thunder made my car windows rattle. I quickly finished pumping gas and was about to get back in my car when I heard the distinctive sound of an engine approaching. Through the curtain of rain, I saw a vehicle turning into the gas station. My blood ran cold as I recognized the black SUV. Before it had fully stopped, 3 doors flew open and people in dark clothing jumped out. They moved with purpose, spreading out to block potential escape routes. Pure instinct took over. I threw myself into my car, jammed the key into the ignition, and floored the accelerator. As I fishtailed out of the gas station, I caught glimpses of the figures running back to their vehicle. The next 20 minutes were a blur of adrenaline and fear as I pushed my car to its limits, taking random turns until I was certain I wasn't being followed. When I finally reached my hotel at 2 in the morning, I immediately reported the incident to the police. They took my statement, but didn't seem particularly optimistic about catching the perpetrators. The officer mentioned that they'd received similar reports along that stretch of highway over the past few months. But without license plates or clear descriptions, there wasn't much they could do. I ended up changing my route home, staying on major highways, even though it added several hours to my journey. Sometimes I wonder what those people wanted, but deep down, I think I know. That remote gas station would have been the perfect spot for someone to disappear, especially on a stormy night when no one else was around. After 15 years in private security, including 7 as an armored truck driver, I thought I'd seen every possible scenario. The Nevada desert routes were usually uneventful, just long stretches of empty highway punctuated by the occasional casino town or mining operation. Standard procedure was to maintain radio contact and follow predetermined routes, especially during night runs. This particular night, I was transporting a larger than usual shipment from Las Vegas to Reno. The desert heat had finally subsided, leaving behind that peculiar emptiness that only comes with nightfall in the Mojave. The armored truck's engine hummed steadily as I monitored the various security systems built into the vehicle. About 20 hours into the route, the monotony was broken by a sudden flash of headlights in my mirrors. In this part of Nevada, traffic was rare after sunset, so any vehicle warranted attention. The lights appeared without warning, as if the vehicle had materialized from the darkness itself. My training kicked in immediately. I radioed my position to dispatch and began monitoring the approaching vehicle's behavior. It was moving erratically, weaving between lanes and rapidly closing the distance between us. Years of experience told me this wasn't normal tourist behavior. The vehicle, which I could now identify as a modified pickup truck, pulled dangerously close to my rear bumper, so close that their headlights disappeared completely from my mirrors. This was a huge red flag. Anyone familiar with armored vehicles knows to maintain a safe distance, especially at night. Then, without warning, their lights went dark. In the pitch black desert night, they effectively vanished from view. I maintained my speed and radioed dispatch again, reporting the suspicious behavior. That's when I heard a metallic thud from the rear of the truck. My heart rate spiked. In the side mirror, I caught glimpses of movement near the back doors. Someone was actually trying to breach the vehicle while we were moving at 60 miles per hour. These weren't amateur thieves. This was a coordinated attack. I initiated emergency protocols, activating additional security measures as I increased speed. The truck was built to withstand significant damage, but I knew that determined attackers with the right tools could eventually break through. The nearest safe point was still 15 minutes away. Through the cab's reinforced back window, I could see sparks flying from what appeared to be some kind of cutting tool. They were attempting to bypass the locks while matching my speed. This level of sophistication and coordination was unprecedented in my experience. I grabbed the radio to call in a full emergency response when suddenly the spark stopped. In my mirrors, I saw the pickup's lights flash back on before it abruptly fell back. Within seconds, they had turned off the highway completely, disappearing as mysteriously as they had appeared. The sudden retreat made no sense until I crested the next hill and saw the flashing lights of a highway patrol car parked at an upcoming checkpoint. The timing couldn't have been better, though I doubt it was coincidence that saved me. More likely, the attackers had a spotter watching the road ahead. I reported the incident immediately, but despite having multiple dash cams and security systems, we never got a clear image of the vehicle or perpetrators. The cameras had been partially obscured by some kind of interference device, further proving this wasn't a random attempt. The company implemented new security protocols after that night, including additional escort vehicles for high-value transports. We later learned that similar attempts had been reported across several states, suggesting an organized group specifically targeting armored vehicles on remote routes. What haunts me most isn't the attempt itself, but the level of planning involved. They knew exactly where to strike, had sophisticated equipment, and demonstrated professional level skills. If it hadn't been for that highway patrol checkpoint, I might not be here to tell this story. Now, every time I see unexpected headlights in my mirror, I can't help but wonder if they're trying again with an even better plan. Seattle's industrial district takes on a different personality after dark. During my night shifts as a 24-hour pharmacy courier, I'd grown accustomed to navigating its maze of warehouses and abandoned factories. The job helped fund my medical school studies, and most nights were uneventful. Just routine deliveries to hospitals and late-night clinics. That night started normally. I'd been making deliveries since 6, following my usual pattern of dropping off medications at various locations throughout the city. After my dinner break at 9:30, I picked up what I thought would be a standard delivery. The address led to one of the older industrial complexes, which wasn't unusual given that some buildings had been converted into tech startups and creative spaces. The GPS guided me through increasingly narrow streets, past towering warehouses and defunct manufacturing plants. Steam rising from underground vents created an eerie fog that drifted across my headlights. The familiar sounds of the city grew distant, replaced by the hollow echo of my car's engine bouncing off empty buildings. Following the navigation, I turned into what appeared to be a massive parking complex connected to an old office building. The concrete structure loomed above me, its windows dark except for a single light on the third floor. My headlights illuminated graffiti, covered walls, and scattered debris. Evidence that this part of the complex had been abandoned for some time. I double-checked the delivery details, but everything matched. The order had come through our verified system, complete with insurance information and a valid prescription. Still, something felt off about the situation. The building appeared completely deserted, yet someone had apparently called in an urgent prescription delivery. Gathering my courage, I grabbed the medication package and approached the entrance. The glass doors were unlocked, which surprised me given the building's condition. The lobby was dark, lit only by the dim glow of emergency exit signs. My footsteps echoed ominously across the empty space. Near the elevator, I found a man waiting. He appeared to be in his 40s, wearing casual clothes that seemed out of place in the corporate setting. His face broke into an unsettling grin when he saw me. "Finally, we've been waiting for the medication," he exclaimed, his voice carrying an artificial enthusiasm that made my skin crawl. "Everyone's upstairs in the recreation room." Something in his demeanor felt rehearsed, almost theatrical. I looked around the lobby, but saw no signs of recent activity. No security desk, no directory. Nothing to indicate this was an active business space. "Everyone?" I asked cautiously, my medical training picking up on the inconsistency. The prescription was for a single patient. The man's smile didn't waver. "Why don't you bring it up?" "Third floor. The elevator's working fine." He gestured toward the elevator doors, which I noticed were covered in a thin layer of dust. Before I could respond, a loud thump echoed from somewhere above us. The man's head snapped up, his practiced smile momentarily slipping. That's when I heard it, a muffled sound that might have been someone calling for help. My heart began racing as I realized the danger I was in. Without a word, I turned and ran for the exit, the medication still clutched in my hands. Behind me, I heard rapid footsteps and angry shouting. Just as I reached my car, 2 more men emerged from around the side of the building, moving quickly to intercept me. I threw myself into the driver's seat, locking the doors just as one of them reached for the handle. The man from the lobby was now running across the parking lot, his friendly demeanor completely gone, replaced by a look of cold determination. My tires squealed against the concrete as I reversed, narrowly missing one of the men who tried to block my path. In my rearview mirror, I saw them running back into the building rather than pursuing me, which somehow made the situation even more disturbing. I called the police as soon as I was safely away, my hands shaking as I explained what had happened. They found the building empty when they investigated, but what they discovered was chilling. The room with the light had been recently occupied, with with evidence suggesting someone had been held there against their will. The prescription turned out to be legitimate, but it had been called in using stolen medical credentials. We later learned that several women had gone missing in the area over the past few months, all of them working late-night delivery or service jobs. I still work in healthcare, but now safely within hospital walls. Sometimes I wonder about what might have happened if I'd gotten into that elevator, or if I hadn't noticed those small inconsistencies in the man's story. The incident taught me that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who try hardest to appear normal. The Arizona heat lingered well into the night, making the air conditioning in my car work overtime. As I delivered medications for the 24-hour veterinary pharmacy as a second-year veterinary student, the job seemed perfect, combining decent pay with flexible hours. Most deliveries were straightforward, usually to local animal hospitals or worried pet owners needing emergency medications. My shift started at 6 in the evening, and the first few hours passed in a blur of routine deliveries. The intense summer heat had finally begun to fade, replaced by the unique stillness of a desert night. Around 8, the orders started slowing down, but I still had a few deliveries to complete before my break. The next delivery took me to the outskirts of Phoenix, where the city gradually dissolves into desert landscape. Modern subdivisions gave way to older properties with larger lots, many of them surrounded by untamed desert vegetation. The GPS directed me down increasingly remote streets, the houses becoming more scattered with each turn. My last delivery of the batch was 10 minutes from my current location, in an area I'd never visited before. The address led me down a narrow road where the pavement was cracked and worn desert plants pushing through the gaps. The streetlights had become sporadic, creating pools of yellow light separated by stretches of darkness. As I followed the GPS, the surroundings changed dramatically. I turned onto a side road that looked more like a trail, with only scattered ruins of what might have once been a housing development. Tall saguaro cacti cast strange shadows in my headlights, their silhouettes resembling watching figures in the darkness. The GPS announced my arrival, but I had to double check the address. What I found wasn't a house, but rather a partially completed structure, abandoned mid-construction. The walls were up, and there was a roof, but many of the windows were just empty frames. The whole scene felt wrong, especially for a delivery requiring a signature. I parked and called the customer's number, hoping to verify the location. A woman answered, her voice oddly calm and collected. She confirmed the address and insisted that despite appearances, they were indeed living in the building. She explained they were renovating, which was why it looked unfinished. Something about her tone made me uneasy, As a vet student, I was trained to notice inconsistencies, and this situation had several. The prescription was for a large breed dog, but I hadn't heard any barking despite pulling up to what was supposedly its home. There were no construction materials visible, no vehicles, and no signs of recent activity. Still on the phone, I heard muffled voices in the background, followed by what sounded like an argument. The woman's voice became strained as she urged me to bring the medication to the door, saying someone would meet me. Just then, movement caught my eye. 2 figures emerged from behind the building, moving with purposeful strides toward my car. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by the shadows. A third person appeared from around the side, spreading out to approach from different angles. My heart nearly stopped when I saw something metallic glint in one of their hands. The woman was still talking on the phone, but her words had become background noise to the sound of blood rushing in my ears. Without hesitation, I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning against the loose gravel. In my mirrors, I saw the figures break into a run, but they quickly gave up as I accelerated away. The woman's voice became angry through the phone, which I immediately disconnected. Once I reached a main road, I pulled over and called both the police and my supervisor. The police took my statement, but seemed skeptical, especially when they found the house empty. However, they did discover concerning evidence. The vacant building had signs of recent occupation, including restraints and discarded drug paraphernalia. The prescription itself had been called in using information stolen from a local veterinarian. The address, while real, belonged to a failed housing development that had been abandoned during the financial crisis. We later learned that similar fake prescriptions had been used in attempts to lure delivery drivers to remote locations across several states. I still work with the veterinary pharmacy, but now I'm much more cautious about unusual delivery locations. The incident taught me that predators don't just target humans or animals. They target opportunities. What appeared to be a simple delivery could have ended very differently if I hadn't trusted my instincts. The late shift delivering medical equipment wasn't my dream job, but it paid well and gave me valuable experience for my biomedical engineering career. Most deliveries involved bringing crucial equipment to hospitals and home care patients around Boston. That night should have been routine. Just another delivery of mobility assistance equipment to a residential address. Around midnight, my work phone lit up with an urgent order. The customer needed a specialized oxygen concentrator delivered to a home address. The order had proper documentation and insurance approval, which wasn't unusual for medical equipment. What caught my attention was the delivery location. Well outside our normal service radius, the autumn night was unusually quiet as I navigated through Boston's sprawling suburbs. Street lights became increasingly scarce as I followed the GPS deeper into a seemingly older neighborhood. The houses here were set far apart, many hidden behind overgrown hedges and untrimmed trees. My phone suddenly buzzed, displaying the customer's number. Before I could answer, the call disconnected. I tried calling back, but there was no response. Something about this made me uneasy, but I reasoned that poor cell reception might be the cause, given the remote location. The GPS eventually led me to a narrow street lined with massive oak trees, their branches creating a dark tunnel overhead. The house number matched my delivery information, but the structure itself gave me pause. It was a large Victorian home, clearly abandoned, with boarded windows and vegetation growing wild across the front. I double-checked the address and equipment details. Everything matched, but the scene before me contradicted the documentation, claiming this was an active residence with a patient requiring oxygen therapy. There were no lights, no cars, and no signs of habitation. As I sat there evaluating the situation, I heard a dull thump from somewhere inside the house. Then, more disturbingly, what sounded like someone pounding on a door or wall. The sound was muffled but distinct, carrying clearly through the night air. My heart rate spiked when I saw the front door slowly open. No lights came on inside, but I could make out movement in the darkness beyond the doorway. A figure appeared, remaining mostly in shadow. Their peculiar stance and silence made my skin crawl. "The equipment's here," I called out, hoping to get some kind of normal response. The figure didn't move or speak, but I heard more thumping from inside, louder this time. It sounded like someone was desperately trying to get attention. The figure suddenly stepped forward, revealing what appeared to be a man in his 30s. His face bore an unsettling grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Why don't you bring it inside? We've been waiting." His tone was smooth, practiced, but something about it felt deeply wrong. Just then, I heard what was unmistakably a muffled cry for help from within the house. The man's expression changed instantly, his fake smile disappearing as he glanced over his shoulder. When he turned back, his eyes had a predatory intensity that sent chills down my spine. I threw the van into reverse, just as two more figures emerged from the shadows at the side of the house. They moved with frightening purpose, but I was already accelerating backward. In my mirrors, I could see them running toward me, but they quickly gave up pursuit as I reached the main road. With shaking hands, I called emergency services. The police response was immediate, likely due to the mention of possible kidnapping. When they investigated, they found the house empty, but with clear signs of recent occupation. More disturbing were the restraints they discovered in one of the upstairs rooms. The entire order turned out be fraudulent, placed using stolen medical credentials and insurance information. The address belonged to property that had been tied up in a lengthy estate dispute, leaving it vacant for years. We later discovered this wasn't an isolated incident. Similar fake orders had been used to target medical delivery personnel across several states. The incident led to major changes in our delivery protocols, including mandatory address verification and no night deliveries to residential addresses without law enforcement escort. Sometimes I wonder about the source of those thumping sounds and cries for help. Was someone being held there? Or was it all part of an elaborate trap? Either way, I'm grateful I trusted my instincts instead of that practiced smile and smooth voice urging me inside. The Oregon wilderness takes on a different personality at night. As a wildlife photographer, I was used to being alone in remote locations, but something about this particular evening felt different. I'd spent the last 6 hours photographing nocturnal animals in the Cascade Mountains, and now, at 2 in the morning, I was finally heading home. My camera equipment was safely packed in the trunk of my Subaru, representing thousands of dollars worth of gear. The mountain road twisted through dense forest, the tall pines creating walls of darkness on either side. My headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, occasionally reflecting off the eyes of small animals in the underbrush. The first 30 minutes of the drive were uneventful. Just me and the gentle humming of my engine echoing through the empty wilderness. I hadn't seen another vehicle since leaving the nature reserve, which wasn't unusual for this time of night. The nearest town was still an hour away, and these back roads rarely saw traffic after sunset. As I rounded a particularly sharp bend, my headlights illuminated something unexpected. A semi-truck parked sideways across both lanes. The massive vehicle completely blocked the road, its cabin dark and seemingly empty. I slowed to a stop, my mind racing to make sense of the situation. Out here, a blocked road usually meant an accident or mechanical failure, but something felt off. The truck was positioned too perfectly, almost deliberately, to block any passage. There was no emergency triangle set up, no hazard lights flashing, nothing to warn approaching vehicles. I checked my phone, unsurprised to find no signal. Looking around, I noticed the shoulder on the right side had a steep drop-off, while the left was blocked by a dense wall of trees. There was barely enough room for a motorcycle to pass, let alone my car. After sitting there for a minute, debating my options, I noticed movement near the truck's cabin. In the faint moonlight, I could make out a tall figure climbing down from the driver's side. The person moved with an unsettling slowness, their attention fixed directly on my vehicle. I called out through my partially open window, asking if they needed help. The figure didn't respond, but continued walking toward me with the same deliberate pace. As they got closer, I could see more details, none of them reassuring. The man was unusually tall, with long, unkempt hair, and his clothes appeared to be covered in dark stains. My heart nearly stopped when I noticed more movement in my peripheral vision. Through my rearview mirror, I spotted several figures emerging from the tree line, spreading out to surround my car. Their coordinated movement suggested this was no random encounter. Before the approaching man could reach my car, I looked over my left shoulder and noticed something the group had apparently overlooked: a small gap between two trees. It would be tight, but my Subaru's off-road capabilities might just handle it. I quickly shifted into reverse, then turned sharply toward the gap. The figures started running toward my car, but I was already accelerating through the trees, branches scraping against my windows. The vehicle bounced violently as I navigated over roots and uneven ground, but somehow I managed to get back onto the road beyond the truck. In my mirrors, I saw several of the figures running back toward the truck. Their rapid, coordinated response only confirmed my suspicions about the deliberate nature of the roadblock. I didn't slow down until I reached the main highway, where I immediately called emergency services. The police investigated, but found the area empty. The truck, which turned out to be stolen, was discovered abandoned several miles away. More disturbing were the reports they shared with me later about similar incidents in the area where vehicles had been forced to stop. Though not all drivers had been as fortunate as I was, I still do wildlife photography, but now I carry a satellite phone and alert local authorities about my locations and schedule. The incident taught me that sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the ones with fangs and claws, but rather those who wait in the darkness, turning isolation into opportunity. What haunts me most isn't the obvious trap, or even the coordinated attack, but rather the casual confidence of that first figure walking toward my car. It was the walk of someone who had done this before, someone who knew that out there in the wilderness, help was too far away to matter. After 20 years on the police force, I thought driving a school bus would be a peaceful way to spend my retirement. The rural Wisconsin routes were usually quiet, just long stretches of farmland punctuated by scattered houses and the occasional small town. Most days, I enjoyed watching the landscape change with the seasons while ensuring kids got safely to and from school. That particular day, I was doing a special evening run, transporting students back from a regional science fair. The event had run late, and by the time we started heading home, the sun was already setting behind the endless cornfields. The bus was nearly empty, with just 3 tired teenagers sitting near the front. All of them from families who lived in the more remote parts of the district. The route took us through increasingly isolated areas, following narrow country roads that wound between farms and through patches of dense woodland. Street lights were rare out here, and the darkness seemed to press in against the bus windows. I'd driven these roads countless times, but something about them felt different at night. Around 10:30, I dropped off the first 2 students, leaving just one girl who lived the furthest out. Her family's farm was another 20 minutes away, accessed by a series of increasingly remote dirt roads. As we drove, I noticed the girl becoming more alert, sitting up straighter and watching intently through the windows. We were about 5 minutes from her stop when headlights suddenly appeared in my side mirror. The vehicle approached rapidly from behind, much too fast for these narrow, uneven roads. Within seconds, it was right on our tail, close enough that their high beams completely flooded the bus interior. My police instincts kicked in immediately. This wasn't normal driving behavior, especially on these isolated back roads. I maintained our speed, knowing the bus wasn't built for evasive maneuvers, but kept checking my mirrors to monitor the vehicle's movements. The girl had turned around in her seat, trying to see the car behind us. "Mr. Cooper," she said, her voice tense. "That's not a normal car. It looks..." Wrong, she was right. Through the glare, I could make out an unusual profile, like the vehicle had been modified. Suddenly, their lights went completely dark. In the pitch black of the rural night, they effectively vanished from view. I could hear the engine, though, still following close behind. The girl's house was just 2 turns away, but I wasn't about to deliver her into what felt like an increasingly dangerous situation. I reached for the radio to call dispatch when a loud bang came from the rear of the bus. Through my mirrors, I could see sparks flying, like they were trying to force the emergency exit. The girl screamed as another bang resonated through the bus, this one accompanied by the sound of metal scraping against metal. Making a split-second decision, I turned the bus around, using the full width of the road to execute the maneuver. As we completed the turn, our headlights illuminated our pursuers for the first time. A heavily modified pickup truck with 3 figures inside. They quickly backed away, apparently surprised by the sudden confrontation. I floored the accelerator, pushing the bus to its limits as I headed back toward the main road. The pickup followed for several minutes before suddenly turning off onto a side road and disappearing into the darkness. I didn't slow down until we reached the local police station, where I had already called ahead to report the incident. The investigation revealed something chilling. The girl's parents weren't home that night, something that wasn't widely known in the community. The family's farmhouse was completely isolated, with no neighbors for miles. If I had dropped her off as scheduled, she would have been alone when they arrived. The police found evidence of similar modified vehicles being used in home invasions across several counties, always targeting isolated properties. They believed the attackers monitored their targets, waiting for vulnerable moments. The fact that they knew both the bus route and the family's schedule suggested long-term planning. I still drive the school bus, but now with additional security measures in place. No student is ever left alone at a stop, and we have multiple ways to contact emergency services. The incident reminded me that even in retirement, my instincts as a police officer never really went away. Sometimes those instincts, combined with a healthy dose of suspicion, are all that stand between safety and disaster. 15 years as a paramedic had taught me to expect the unexpected, especially working for a private ambulance service in the Colorado Rockies. Our routes often took us through remote mountain passes, transferring patients between isolated communities and major medical centers. The job required nerves of steel, particularly during winter nights when the roads turned treacherous. That evening, I was transporting medical supplies to a small mountain clinic. These supply runs were routine, but essential for keeping remote facilities stocked with crucial medications and equipment. The winter storm had delayed my departure, forcing me to drive through the night instead of making the delivery during daylight hours. The ambulance's heavy suspension handled the mountain roads well, but the increasing snowfall made visibility poor. The headlights reflected off the swirling snow, creating an almost hypnotic effect. I'd been driving for about 3 hours, with another 2 to go before reaching the clinic. The radio crackled occasionally with updates from dispatch, but otherwise, the night was eerily quiet. Around midnight, the snow began falling harder, reducing visibility to just a few yards ahead. I was considering pulling over to wait out the worst of the storm, when movement in my mirror caught my attention. Headlights had appeared suddenly behind me, as if the vehicle had materialized out of the swirling snow. Years of emergency driving had honed my situational awareness. Something about this vehicle's approach felt wrong. They were driving aggressively, much too fast for these dangerous conditions. Within moments, they were right behind my ambulance, their high beams flooding my cabin with harsh light. I maintained a steady speed, knowing these roads too well to risk any sudden movements. Through my mirrors, I could make out what appeared to be a modified pickup truck, riding unusually high on its suspension. They stayed directly behind me, matching my every slight adjustment in speed. Then, without warning, their lights went dark. In the swirling snow and pitch darkness, they became nearly invisible. I could hear their engine, though, still following dangerously close. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I realized this was deliberate hunting behavior. A loud metallic clang suddenly resonated through the ambulance. They had hit us from behind, not hard enough to cause damage, but definitely intentionally. I reached for the radio to call dispatch when another hit came, this one harder, causing me to grip the wheel tighter to maintain control. Through the rearview mirror, I caught glimpses of movement as they pulled alongside the ambulance. 3 figures were visible in the truck's cabin, all wearing dark clothing. The passenger window rolled down, and one of them leaned out, holding something that glinted metallically in the dim light. My paramedic training kicked in, helping me stay calm as I assessed my options. These mountain roads had few escape routes, but I knew every turn and shoulder. Just ahead was a sharp bend with a wider shoulder used by maintenance vehicles. I waited until the last possible moment, then hit the brakes hard. The pickup shot past us, its occupants clearly surprised by the sudden maneuver. I quickly turned onto the maintenance shoulder, engaging the ambulance's powerful emergency lights for the first time. The sudden burst of bright red and white light illuminated the entire area, momentarily blinding our pursuers. They swerved sharply, nearly losing control on the snow-covered road. Instead of trying to turn around, they accelerated away, disappearing into the storm as quickly as they had appeared. I waited several minutes before pulling back onto the road, this time heading toward the nearest state patrol station. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Several ambulances had been attacked in the region over the past months, always in remote areas during bad weather. The perpetrators targeted vehicles carrying medical supplies, presumably looking for drugs and equipment to steal. What made this even more chilling was the level of coordination involved, suggesting these weren't opportunistic attacks, but rather carefully planned operations. The incident led to major changes in our operating procedures. No more solo supply runs at night, and all vehicles were equipped with additional security features. But what stays with me isn't the attack itself, but rather the calculated nature of it. They had studied our routes, knew the terrain, and chose their moment carefully. In the end, it was only experience and luck that prevented what could have been a much worse outcome. Working as a medical equipment delivery driver wasn't my primary job, but it complemented my nursing career perfectly. Most evenings, after my hospital shift, I'd deliver essential medical devices to elderly patients around Portland, Maine. The work was rewarding, knowing I was helping people maintain their independence at home. That evening started routinely enough. I clocked in at 6 and spent the next 3 hours delivering various pieces of equipment, from mobility aids to monitoring devices. After a quick dinner break, I picked up what would be my final delivery of the night. a sophisticated oxygen concentrator that needed professional setup. The address took me to an area I wasn't familiar with, despite my years of working in home health care. The GPS guided me away from the familiar suburban streets and into an older industrial district that was slowly being converted into residential spaces. The streetlights here were sporadic, creating alternating patches of light and shadow. Following the navigation, I turned onto a long driveway that led through a thickly wooded area. The pavement was old and cracked, with vegetation growing through the gaps. After about a quarter mile, the trees opened up to reveal a large Victorian house, its dark silhouette looming against the night sky. My nursing instincts immediately noted several inconsistencies. The house showed no signs of accessibility modifications, which would be essential for someone requiring oxygen therapy. There were no ramps, no handrails, and the front steps were steep and worn. More concerning, there wasn't a single light on inside, despite the delivery being scheduled and requiring setup assistance. I double-checked the order details. Everything matched, including the insurance information and doctor's authorization. Still, something felt deeply wrong about the situation. In my experience, patients requiring oxygen therapy were meticulous about preparations for equipment delivery. I decided to call the contact number listed on the order. The phone rang several times before someone answered. A man's voice, unnaturally calm and measured, confirmed the address and insisted I bring the equipment inside. When I asked about the lack of lighting, he claimed they were having electrical issues. As a nurse, I'm trained to notice subtle warning signs, and everything about this situation was raising red flags. The man's voice lacked the breathlessness typically associated with someone needing oxygen support. His answers to my medical questions were vague and inconsistent. I remained in my vehicle, engine running, as I conducted a more thorough verification. That's when I noticed movement near the side of the house. In the dim moonlight, I could make out at least two figures moving with purposeful stealth between the shadows. The man on the phone was still talking, his tone becoming increasingly insistent. "We really need you to bring the equipment inside," he repeated, an edge of frustration creeping into his voice. In the background, I heard what sounded like whispered instructions and the scraping of furniture. My heart nearly stopped when I caught a glimpse of something metallic in one of the figure's hands. Using my training to keep my voice steady, I told the man I needed to check something in my vehicle and would return shortly. As soon as I ended the call, I began backing down the driveway. The figures by the house immediately sprung into action, running toward my van. In my mirrors, I saw a third person emerge from behind the building, all of them moving with practiced coordination. I threw the van into drive the moment I reached the main road. Not not stopping until I reached the nearest police station. The subsequent investigation uncovered a disturbing operation. The house was supposed to be vacant, tied up in a lengthy estate dispute. The order had been placed using stolen medical credentials and insurance information. More alarming were the restraints and sedatives the police found inside, suggesting their intentions went far beyond simple robbery. We later learned this wasn't an isolated incident. Similar scenarios had played out across several states, specifically targeting medical equipment delivery services. The perpetrators exploited the trust inherent in healthcare services, knowing that delivery personnel would be more likely to enter a location if they believed someone needed medical assistance. The experience changed how I approach deliveries, implementing stricter verification protocols and never working alone on night shifts. But what haunts me most is how they attempted to use my medical training against me, counting on my instinct to help others to lure me into their trap. It was those same medical instincts, however, that ultimately helped me recognize the danger before it was too late. Last spring, I started working as a delivery driver for Green Kitchen, a popular food delivery service in suburban Portland. Being a college freshman, I needed a flexible job that would fit around my classes. The position seemed perfect. I could work evening shifts and make decent tips. My friend Jake already worked there and helped me get the job. The night that changed everything started like any other rainy spring evening in Portland. The streets were glistening under the streetlights, and the constant drizzle created a misty haze that made everything look slightly surreal. Business was surprisingly slow that night. Most people probably preferred to stay in and cook rather than order delivery in such weather. Around 9:30, an order came in. Jake took the call and quickly prepared a vegan bowl with some fresh juice. Pretty standard for our restaurant. The delivery address was in an area I hadn't been to before, about 15 minutes away in an older part of town. As I drove through the increasingly unfamiliar streets, the rain picked up intensity. My windshield wipers were working overtime, and I had to slow down to navigate the poorly lit roads. When I turned onto Maple Drive, I immediately regretted it. The street was in terrible condition, more potholes than actual road. The whole area had an abandoned feel to it, with overgrown yards and peeling paint on most houses. The house I was looking for stood at the very end of the street. It was a Victorian-style building, towering 3 stories high with a wraparound porch. What caught my attention wasn't its size, though. It was the stark contrast between the obviously decaying structure and the meticulously maintained garden. Despite the darkness and rain, I could see perfectly trimmed rose bushes and what looked like exotic flowers blooming everywhere. I parked at the bottom of the sloped driveway grabbed the order, and made my way up to the porch. Each step on the old wooden stairs produced an unsettling creak that seemed too loud in the quiet night. I glanced back at my car, barely visible through the curtain of rain, and noticed how isolated this place felt. The dense woods behind my vehicle suddenly seemed much darker and closer than before. After knocking on the heavy wooden door, I heard movement inside, soft, deliberate footsteps, moving slowly across what sounded like hardwood floors. They got closer and closer to the door until they stopped right on the other side. I put on my best customer service smile and held out the delivery, but the door remained closed. "Green Kitchen Delivery," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing unease. No response came from the other side, just complete silence. I was about to place the order on the porch and leave when something caught my eye. A figure standing by the corner of the house. My blood ran cold. Through the rain, I could make out a woman in what appeared to be an elegant dress, completely inappropriate for the weather. She stood perfectly still, just watching me. When our eyes met, I noticed something was off about her face. It seemed too rigid, almost mask-like in the dim light. I didn't wait to find out more. I dropped the delivery and practically ran back to my car. As I pulled away, I caught one last glimpse in my rearview mirror. The woman hadn't moved an inch, just stood there in the rain, watching my car disappear into the night. Back at Green Kitchen, Jake noticed something was wrong as soon as I walked in. When I described what happened, he went pale. Apparently, we weren't supposed to deliver to that address anymore. The last driver who went there had a similar experience, but the woman had tried to get him to come inside, claiming she needed help with something. I quit that delivery job soon after, but I still drive past Maple Drive sometimes, just to prove to myself it wasn't all in my head. The house is still there, roses still blooming impossibly perfect in all seasons, but I never see the woman again, and somehow that makes it even creepier. This happened just weeks ago, during one of those brutal January nights when the temperature dropped well below freezing. I'd recently taken a job as a night security guard at the Riverside Mall, a massive shopping center that had been closed for renovation. The building was this enormous 3-story structure from the 80s, with most of its stores emptied out and sealed off. The job seemed straightforward enough. Patrol the building, check for any break-ins, and make sure the construction equipment was secure. The company was paying good money, especially for night shifts, which helped me ignore the eerie feeling of being alone in such a huge, empty space. That night, the snowstorm outside was relentless. The wind howled through the building's empty corridors, creating weird echoes that bounced off the walls. I was stationed in what used to be the main food court, a vast open space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a perfect view of the blizzard outside. The first few hours of my shift went by slowly. I made my regular rounds, checking each floor and marking my checkpoints. The construction crew had left various tools and materials scattered around, their shapes casting strange shadows under my flashlight beam. Around midnight, I settled back in the food court with my thermos of coffee, watching the snow build up against the windows. That's when I heard it, a distinct metallic screech, like someone forcing open one of the service doors. The sound echoed through the empty mall, setting my nerves on edge. I radioed in to report it, but only got static in response. The storm must have been interfering with the signal. Following protocol, I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the noise. It seemed to be coming from the east wing, where they'd been replacing the electrical systems. As I walked through the dark corridors, my footsteps echoing on the tile floor, I could hear other sounds, the subtle scrape of movement, like someone trying to be quiet, but not quite managing it. "Security," I called out, my voice sounding much less confident than I'd intended. "This building is closed. If someone's here, you need to leave immediately." The response I got chilled me to the bone. A soft, raspy laughter, somewhere in the darkness ahead of me. It sounded unnatural, almost mechanical, and definitely not like someone who'd accidentally wandered in from the storm. I swept my flashlight across the corridor, the beam cutting through the darkness. That's when I caught a glimpse of movement near one of the old department stores. A figure ducked behind a construction barrier, but not before I saw them. A man in dark clothes, holding something that glinted metallically in my flashlight beam. "We've been watching you," the voice rasped, closer now. "Every night, walking your rounds, all alone in here." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I started backing away, keeping my light trained on the spot where I'd seen the movement. Suddenly, another sound caught my attention. Footsteps behind me. They were trying to surround me. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, not caring about protocol or pride anymore. I could hear them pursuing, their footsteps echoing off the walls, mixing with that terrible laughing. I made it back to the food court and sprinted for the security office, slamming and locking the door behind me. Through the office window, I could see shadows moving in the darkness of the food court. I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. They arrived in force 15 minutes later, but by then, whoever had been in the mall was gone. The police review of the security cameras showed 3 men entering through a service entrance they'd forced open. They were carrying tools and weapons. The next day, we found evidence that they'd been attempting to break into the mall's old jewelry store vault, which still contained some safety deposit boxes that hadn't been emptied when the mall closed. I quit that job the next day. The company installed a new high-tech security system and doubled the number of guards on each shift. But sometimes, when I drive past the mall at night, I can still see those empty windows staring back at me like dead eyes. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run when I did.
Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.